how does an individual who knows and is intimately familiar with the skeletons in their closet be able to share in a significant way, in a way that will create a positive and net gain, as opposed to it be, something that undermines their leadership?
Sure. Yeah. Like I would categorize this as like the selective and strategic self-disclosure. Like, how do I know what to share, when to share
Yes.
it? And so you might hate me for this answer, but I do want to go back to just something that ties into the beginning. Part of what I know to share and part of what we coach other people to share still does come back to them taking the inventory of their audience or intended audience, right? So like even knowing what to share in my future book, like I know that my audience has certain drives. A lot of my audience is adversity drives. A lot of my audience has, a unity and achievement drive and whatever. So by default, I know the audience is going to react fairly positively. Not everybody. Of course, there's going to be the 1-star Amazon reviews and whatever, but like people want to feel connection. I mean, by and large, the number one thing that unites us as human beings is an element of shared struggle, And so
Definitely.
how far to go, I think you gauge that just because I'm very big against one size fits all answers. You gauge that by leaving breadcrumbs, right? Like you think of like, all right, what is the one thing I want people to know? Right. And then how can I kind of lead them to this? Like, you don't necessarily want to, like, let's say, and sorry if this is heavy, but let's say in the past I had been, there had been like sexual abuse in my past. And for a lot of people there are, right? Well, if I've not shared anything at all about myself ever, any kind of struggles, whatever, like just to come out and be like, I've been sexually abused, that's kind of a lot for people to process, especially if you've never shared anything like that before. Right. Now, if you're somebody that, you've kind of, and I don't want to use the term in a negative context, but you've kind of groomed your audience. Like they know you're an open individual. You've shared professional struggles. You put other things out there, whatever. And then you kind of say, well, hey, here's the impetus of a lot of this. I've never talked about this before. Boom. That's not as much of a shock. So I think you've got to look at your audience. I think you've got to assess your past behaviors. Like, have I ever shared anything before, major or minor? And then what was the reception of that and the feedback of that? I think that, again, it comes down to like kind of timing and also intent. Like, why are you sharing this? Where are you sharing this? Again, if you're choosing a context poor medium where you've shared that and you haven't really talked about like, that's why you started a business and that's why you decided to start a nonprofit for this, or that's why you chose that. Like, people need to connect the dots, help it make sense. Like when I talked about the fact that I dealt with depression and when people ask me like, why are you so obsessed with communication and power dynamics? And I got asked this question last February. And I go, listen, man, like I nearly lost my life at the age of 15. And I spent a year of my life with basically a Machiavellian group of doctors and nurses who just like treated everybody like symptoms. And I saw people die. And like, I've just met a lot of shitty people in my life. And I also didn't understand like where I played a role because of a lack of literacy in these things in making certain parts of my life harder than they needed to be. And so like, why would I not share that stuff and have an interest in it? But like just being able to tell them like, all right, like, God, like I get why you shared that now. And also like that's connecting the dots for people. So yeah, audience, timing, the where you're sharing it, make sure you bridge the gap of the why. Yeah. All these things.
Yeah. And by the way, if guys are listening and they want to hear some of that story about when you were younger with that experience with those doctors, we talked a lot about it in our previous podcast. So they can definitely go back and listen to that one. I wanted to ask when you should not share, like why maybe you should not share, when you should not share. I was thinking about it with what I had just told you earlier with alcohol use. I didn't I stopped drinking little over 5 months ago now, closer to 6. And I didn't share right when I stopped because I didn't feel like it would be appropriate for me to disclose that when I wasn't actively on the path to fixing it. So I waited 2 or 3 months before I disclosed that to our guys in the Iron Council because I felt like it would be more powerful if I shared it after I was already doing something about fixing the problem. Like I didn't feel right by saying, hey, I'm an alcoholic. So like, here I am. I was like, no, here was what I was doing. And here's what I'm doing to fix it. I'm actively on the path. But when should you not share, or why should you not share?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Oh, let me give a narrative to kind of help give principles to this and break it down. So there was an individual that had an autistic son, and he had applied for a job, and he didn't tell his soon-to-be boss about this. And the reason it was important that he would have told him is he has to take his son to some doctor's appointments weekly and, things like that because of his autism. But he was scared. He kept this in kind of what, the Joe Harry window folks out there would call like the hidden window, because he was scared if he mentioned that his boss might perceive it as like, oh, you kind of come with complexities.
Baggage. Sure.
Right. And so he ended up getting the job, and he would kind of disappear for relatively large swaths of time, 2 to 3 hours, here and there, still get his work done and all that. But eventually his boss was like, dude, where the hell are you going? Like, you take the longest lunch breaks ever. Where are you going? What are you doing? And the guy eventually just said, listen, I have a son. He's got special needs and I have to do this. And the boss was like, well, why didn't you say anything? And he said, well, I didn't want you to perceive it as blank, blank, blank. And the boss is like, it's fine. Like, we can work out the hours saying, take care of your son. And by the way, like, the environment we have here is conducive that you need to talk about those kind of, now the guy knows, right? So I think what people need to first do is audit. Let's say we had an audit.
Let me just add one thing in that. And I don't know the situation. Clearly I don't know that. But I think in that situation, I would still maybe advise not to share in an interview in that situation, because they know now he's a good worker. So it's like, it's fine. We'll take care of you because we know you're a good worker. But an interview process, I don't know, man. You say it would be okay if I told you, but I don't really know if that's the case.
No question. Right. And like, so just like anything, and when you put out advice or stories, you can't make them reflective of every experience everybody's had.
Right, of course. Yes.
The bigger point here is that at some point he should have shared, whether he shared it in the interview or later on. And let's say he didn't. Cool. Well, now he knows, right? Yeah. So that's part of my answer is you're never going to know for sure. But the more tactical answer here and what people have to consider is, all right, let's break down a case study. Let's say somebody here is like, whether it's a job or this or that, or a relationship, and they want to talk about a fetish, whatever that is, they need to think, all right, what is the context of the relationship? What are the worst case scenarios if I don't share X? How likely are they? There's a lot of unknowns. But what I do is just like, I'd tell them to write down, like, listen, what is the shit you're not saying? Like, what are you not sharing? What is it you actually want them to understand? And then how can you craft your message and the timing of it so that this makes sense? Because you don't want to share everything. And we made that point, right? There's certain things that need to stay in that hidden window. Like, you are interviewing me right now, right? Even though like you chip in, it's not your job to be open about everything. You're the interviewer. So there's some things you're gonna withhold. That's functional. But people just have to say, like, if there's a marriage going, like, my wife and I, here's something I'll open up. Like my wife and I, at one point in the past 3 years, thought about getting separated, right? And this is something that is like, I shouldn't be talking about. I coach communication, and somebody goes, well, what would you say, like, to people that, let's say you and your wife had gotten divorced, wouldn't that completely screw your business? And I go, well, listen, if my wife and I are open enough, let's say that would have happened. If we were open enough that we found out that we weren't the right fit for one another, and we made the best move possible based on this, and we had tried and we had gone through all, like, then like, how does that diminish my expertise as somebody, what I do, just because a situation in life didn't work out? Like, okay, now this goes back to what you said about people being worried about skeletons in their closet and leadership. Whoops. This company didn't work out, or this venture didn't work out. Guess I'm a bad leader. Steve Jobs had companies that didn't work out. Tony Robbins has marriage, is on his like second or third marriage. Now, my wife and I figured it out, but there's no guarantee of future success. There's no in any venture. But the point is us going through that struggle allowed us to be more open about this. So to your point, sometimes people are just going to have to take a risk, Ryan. They're going to have to be open about something if they care about it. They're going to have to know that they're not in control of what, beyond a point, what that person does with that information. But the only way for communication to fail is if it stops or ceases to exist to begin with. So that's what I would say is, like, step one, you've got to open up about some things. Otherwise, don't get pissed when people don't understand you, or they're not committed or whatever, because they're not going to trust you. You don't have that power with them.